Buonasera, good afternoon, and welcome to the Italian Academy. I'm Barbara Faedda, the Academy's Executive Director, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all today. In 2016, the Academy established the International Observatory for Cultural Heritage to work on the conservation, protection, and preservation of cultural heritage. Since its start, we have organized numerous initiatives across many disciplines and geographical frontiers. Among the most successful of these is the Sardinia Cultural Heritage Project. Thanks to a grant from the region of Sardinia, and with a fruitful collaboration with the Monteprama Foundation, our multi-year program on Sardinia's cultural heritage is bringing to New York a whole series of conferences, symposia, lectures, and exhibitions. In a related initiative, the Academy facilitated the loan of a 3,000-year-old colossal statue from Monteprama to New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2023. Today, we have the honor of having with us Fabrizio Di Michele, Consul General of Italy in New York City. So before continuing this introduction, I would like to invite him to say a few words.
Buonasera, good afternoon all. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and opening this very interesting meeting on the UNESCO site of Barumini. And I have to thank for this, of course, the Executive Director of the Italian Academy, Barbara Faedda, and Professor Carta of Trento University for taking forward this very important and ambitious project in the context of the Italian Academy. In the past few years, we have seen this fantastic exhibit of one giant of Monteprama at Met Museum, which was an absolute first time that he traveled actually to the United States, and the second time he traveled outside Italy. We follow other important activities and publications by the Italian Academy in the context of this project on the Sardinia cultural heritage, including on the city of Taros, and of course the Nuraghe of Barumini. Overall, when we think about Sardinia, even in Italy, very honestly, people think about, I don't know, crystal clear waters, very chic and fancy places to go on vacation. But it's still very little known the depth and richness of the prehistorical history in this region, on which lots of light has been shed in the past decades, but probably not yet enough. This is really a work in progress. That's why this project is so important, because year after year, there's something more we learn and we can explain about this very ancient civilization. Actually, we're talking about one of the numerous ancient Mediterranean civilization, but probably the least known altogether. So it's really fascinating for us, for the very Italians, and I hope it is also for the American public, both experts and non, to get to know better and more about this civilization. And for this, I really have to thank the Italian Academy and all the speakers today, which will contribute to this very interesting discussion on these beautiful places that I warmly suggest all of you to visit if you haven't done it yet. And then you can go to the sea as well, by the way. So enjoy the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Consul General, for your kind words. I would also like to mention that the UNESCO director for New York City can't be with us today because of a commitment at the UN, but he sent us a note, quote,
We commend the choice of the topic, which promises to shed light on the recent discoveries made at the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Nuraghi in Barumini, so we thank him. Paolo Carta will now give you further details about this Sardinia project.
Thank you, Barbara. In 2022, we launched the Sardinia Cultural Heritage Project with a successful digital exhibition of giant statues found in Monte Prama. The digital exhibition can still be toured online, and it was followed in 2023 by the publication of the complete opus by Columbia University Press in the volume called A Lost Mediterranean Culture, the Giant Statues of Sardinia's Monte Prama, the first English language book to explore Monte Prama's limestone statues, among the most important archaeological discoveries of the past 50 years. It inaugurated a series of books that will focus on the unique archaeological heritage of Sardinia. We are now working with Columbia University Press on the proceedings of last year's roundtable on the fascinating site of Taros. So an edited volume with 7 essays will be published in 2025. Similarly, the plan is to produce a book on this year's initiative on Barumini. For all this, we are so glad to have a fruitful ongoing collaboration with professors and experts from Italian universities and institutions, as well as with scholars from the United States who study Mediterranean archaeology. Thank you. Barbara.
Today we are very grateful and proud to have with us such a distinguished group of international scholars. They all traveled to be with us. We look forward to our speakers enlightening us about one of the most fascinating archaeological sites in the Mediterranean, with guidance from the moderator, Stephen Ellis. Our plan is to hear the 5 talks with a brief coffee break in the middle, and then to have a short discussion and roundtable and a Q&A with the audience, and then inaugurate the exhibition on the ground floor with finally some wine and food. But now, let me introduce the moderator of this conference. Stephen Ellis is a Roman archaeologist with interests in ancient cities and urban life. He has directed the University of Cincinnati's excavations at Pompeii and Taros, Sardinia. His primary publications include The Roman Retail Revolution, 2018, The Making of Pompeii, 2011, The Porta Stabia Neighborhood at Pompeii, July 2023. Stephen is the recipient of several major grants and fellowships from the National Geographic, the Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome, the NEH, and much more, and is Associate Professor of Classics at the University of Cincinnati. I wish you a pleasant afternoon, and I now leave the stage to Professor Ellis. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Barbara and also Paolo for bringing me here today, and bringing all of us here today as well. My role here is really a very privileged one. I get to serve as the moderator. I get to learn from this incredible assembly of experts and scholars on Sardinia, and so I'm very much looking forward to all that follows. So in thanking the organizers and the sponsors for bringing us here, I also want to acknowledge the honor it is to have the presence of Fabrizio di Michele, the Consul General of Italy, and also, again, just to thank everybody for being here for what promises to be a really fantastic and fascinating afternoon, followed by food and drink, all right, on all things about Nuragic culture. I'm looking forward to this as the introduction for myself very kindly mentioned. My own interests have essentially historically been in Roman urbanism. But that journey of working in Roman cities has taken me personally to Sardinia in more recent years. And so in the last few years, I've had the great fortune of being able to do some field work in Sardinia at Tharos, at the Punic Roman city of Tharos. And so while on the one hand, my expertise and professional interests stretch a little bit later, one of the first lessons that I myself learned was the extent to which this Nuragic culture was just so incredibly pervasive and kind of omnipresent, not just in Sardinian archaeology, but also in the Roman archaeology that I've been looking at myself in the field at the archaeological excavations of Tharos. So for that reason, I am myself very much looking forward to learning still more from our speakers this afternoon. You're of course not here really to listen to me. My role as a moderator will just be to try to facilitate things. So the first thing I want to try to do is to ensure that we keep to timing. And so I'll be working on that. Wish me luck as that goes. But also what that means, I will also ask if you have your cell phones, just a reminder to kind of turn them down at least, so we don't have as many distractions coming that way. With that being said, what I thought I would do now is just I'll do introductions one by one. I think we'll have time to do it that way, and again, we'll have this break coming up a little bit later. That brings me, of course, to then our first speaker for this afternoon. So we have Anna Depalmas, who is a full professor of prehistory and protohistory at the University of Sassari, with primary interests in the Sardinian Bronze and Iron Ages, as well as in movement and traffic across the Mediterranean and the production of protohistoric metalwork. Anna has directed and carried out numerous excavations and research projects in Sardinia, to mention Iloi and Susupiage Sedilo, Saosa Cabras, Abinitetti, Lugeras, and Santa Cristina Paoli Latino, and others. The list is long. Also work in Menorca and in Tunisia as part of archaeological and ethno-archaeological projects. I really look forward to hearing what Anna has for us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So I would like to thank Columbia University, and in particular Barbara Faedda and Paolo Carta, and also Abigail Asher, for their kind invitation for an occasion that will make it possible to illustrate various aspects relating to the proto-history of Sardinia, and in particular the Nuraghi, that are one of its most significant expressions. No, I think it's the first, yes. The idea that the Nuragic phenomenon, with its extraordinary architectural manifestations in elevated dry stone buildings, arose suddenly, almost without any premonitory clues, is clearly a misleading impression. If one looks for antecedents, the attention is directed to the last phases of the Copper Age, signs, as well known, the early Bronze Age of the Bonanno phases, has yielded only few traces of dwellings. In this sense, the idea that the developments of the Neolithic Monte Claro phases contributed, presumably not in direct temporal continuity, to the formative phase of the Nuragic period also seems plausible, as shown both by the marked cyclopean character of the Neolithic constructions attributed to this aspect. The prototype towers, the walls, whose wide slab-covered corridors anticipate the corridor Nuraghi, and the rectangular and absidal dwelling structures, also characteristic of the first manifestations of domestic Nuragic architecture. An example of this evolution is well attested in the complex of the Mandramana in Tula. The so-called Nuragic civilizations corresponds to the first part of the long cycle of the Sardinian Bronze Age, which is characterized by the extraordinary phenomenon of the architectural buildings from which it takes its name. The word nuraghe, as well as its local variants nuraghe, nuraghi, nuraci, nuraghi, nuraggi, nuraku, etc., we can be traced back to an ancient Mediterranean linguistic substratum, indicates a dry stone masonry construction that, in the most characteristic form, takes the shape of a truncated cone tower with several stories. It is possible to state that the Nuraghi present aspects of remarkable homogeneity in planimetric schemes and architectural solutions, while admitting a wide typological variety. The considerable number of nuraghi scattered throughout Sardinian territory on the hills and mountains, but also in the plains and near the coasts, contributes to creating the image of an island strongly characterized and dominated by the presence of prehistoric towers that seem to contrast with the relative rarefaction of present-day rural agglomerations. This perception, although only apparent, allows general reflection on the consistency of protohistoric settlement forms and to consider the value of the nuraghe in this context. The characteristics of the terrain respond to economic logics of agrarian exploitation similar to those of current traditional practices which prefer non-irrigated volcanic land, but with well-trained soils. From a morphological point of view, plateaux are occupied as well as hilly areas and large river plains, valleys, and mountainous areas, even above 1,000 meters above sea level. Although the towers and the numerous ruins scattered throughout the island may give the impression of a general homogeneity of type, there are significant differences, the most significant of which, as an expression of a chronological distinction, is that between corridor nuraghe and tholos nuraghe, which in turn are divided into single tower or simple nuraghe and multi-tower or complex nuraghe. At the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age, the formative period of Nuragic culture was marked by the construction of corridor nuraghe, whose architecture was not yet technically perfect. These are buildings with strong rough stone walls and smaller internal spaces. There is not a recurrent floor plan, and some buildings are elliptical, some quadrilateral, and some circular. We hypothesize that the original buildings were between 8 and 15 meters high. During the first phase, village construction also began. In the earliest phase, rectangular huts are as common as circular ones. The number of corridor nuraghi is undoubtedly inferior to that of the classical type of nuraghi. Just over 400 are known, although statistical projections estimate an original number of between 1,050 and 1,370 units. Inside the nuraghe, the rooms are narrow, and the wall mass prevails over the usable space. Data from off-corridor nuraghe indicate that they were used as dwelling places for family groups. The few excavation and the low density of this nuraghi also indicates that the society was still not very cohesive and consisted of small family groups. Most of them were precisely sited in places where the land could be used for pasture or less intensely agriculture, such as basalt plateau. The category of archaic nuraghi also includes nuraghi with a naviform chamber, i.e. structures characterized by an elliptical, more or less wide, and elongated inner room defined by projecting walls and ending with a roof of horizontal slabs that is definable on the basis of the section as a truncated ogive. These monuments are quite significant for the reconstruction of the indigenous development of Nuragic architecture, as they represent the connecting element between corridor and tholos nuraghe. In the late Middle and recent Bronze Age, single-towered tholos nuraghe predominated. This type of nuraghe has an entrance corridor, an opening on the left for a stairway which leads up to the upper floor or floors, and a niche on the right. The corridor leads into a circular chamber covered with a false vault, tholos, with between 1 and 3 niches in the walls. The upper floor may contain a similar chamber to that on the ground floor, or else an open terrace. This floor originally had a wooden structure supported by stone projection, i.e. mensoloni, which extended upwards from the last layer of stones. The building described above is a type of basic model for the nuraghi, which were built first, more frequently as single towers in the late Middle Bronze Age, and then also in conjunction with other towers in complex nuraghe, with between 2 and 5 towers in the recent Bronze Age. Their use may have varied, but on the whole, they can be considered to have always been principally dwelling places. In the course of time, the military perspective has been the one most followed, although in recent times, the idea of the prevailing defensive use has been greatly attenuated in favor of a function in this sense that is not exclusive or decidedly more oriented towards a residential use. If one reflects on the history of studies about the Nuraghi, it becomes clear how the warlike interpretation, influenced the nomenclature of the structural elements of the Nuraghi, for which terms proper to military architecture are still used today, such as antemural, rampart, bastion, mast, embrasure, garita, pincer gate, etc. The appearance of the Nuragic towers with the extraordinary walling apparatus of the towers and outbuildings determines the assimilation to a fortress or part of a fortified castle, even though the most important requirement for an ancient fortress, i.e. the position on the high ground, is almost always disregarded. In fact, observation of the positions occupied by the Nuraghi leads one to observe that the naturally defended morphologic unit is not systematically selected, but rather seems to follow a random logic, in clear contradiction to a conscious structuring of a defensive system. The complex Nuraghi have also been interpreted as a palace castles, palace kingdoms, proof of the existence of a stratified and pyramidal society headed by a king, but not indicators of rule, distinctions, or artifacts that can be linked to emerging and powerful figures residing in the Nuraghe have ever been found, nor are there individual tombs with distinctive grave goods. On the other hand, the pluri-towers Nuraghe are built according to the same construction scheme as the simple tower, through the iteration and juxtaposition of modules, and there are no particular rooms intended for administrative or representative functions. The installation of monuments of a complex type seems to be part of an organizational arrangement of the territory, in which the consolidation of certain settlements appears to be linked to productive dynamics aimed at intensifying the exploitation of local resources of major economic interest. Complex nuraghi are found in zones where the surrounding resources were more abundant. In the recent Bronze Age, the increased use of the land can be seen from the reduction in size of the forests, including through deliberate burning and further increases in the area under cultivation or used as pasture. So, analysis of the relationship between the monuments and the settled areas allows one to state the presence of nuraghe was not related to the morphology or the defensive potential of the site. Determining factors seem to have been the environmental resources and the possible economic exploitation of the area. It has been hypothesized that the distribution of the nuraghi in the territory took place within cantons or districts corresponding to territorial units into which Nuragic Sardinia would have been organized, areas pertaining to the various communities that would have worked through the bulk works constituted by the Nuraghi to safeguard the economic interests of their territory. In the central chamber, hearths, lithic millstones, and even access to silos have frequently been documented, as well as pottery used for the preparation, cooking, consumption, and storage of foodstuffs. Much more diverse are the data that emerge from the contexts in which a continuity of use or, in any case, frequentation in the early Iron Age or the final phase of the Bronze Age is attested. Finds of weapons, foodstuffs, valuable artifacts, and sacred furnishings are in fact linked to those periods, indicating different functions, no longer only civil, but also cultic, documented in the reuse phases of the nuraghe. The monumental feature that characterizes civil construction, i.e. the nuraghi, also pervades the funerary structures, contributing to the perception of a precise programmatic intent that apparently involves all architectural manifestations. In many cases, at a short distance from the nuraghi and the villages, one or more collective tombs are built, the so-called giants' tombs. The typical tombs of the Nuragic period were usually built in the Middle Bronze Age, although there is evidence that they were used and probably also still built during the recent Bronze Age. The exedra of the tombs was the space where offerings were left and where the communal ceremonies took place. The presence of conic stones, i.e. beetles, near the tombs suggests that ancestors' worship may have been practiced. The building of these tombs seems to be perfectly in line with the tendency to create monuments and with the character of the collective and the communal structures which typify the Nuragic buildings. The visibility of the giant tombs in the territory was assured by the monumentality of the structures, which, both for those tombs with arched stele and those with front with roofs, could even reach 4 meters heights. The last phase of the long period intended as Nuragic civilizations coincided with the final Bronze Age and the early Iron Age. Major cultural changes took place during this phase, including the end of the period of Nuraghi constructions and the growth of villages, either in isolation or clustered around existing nuraghe. The nuraghi were used as food stores and for cult rituals, although in rare cases they continued to be inhabited, There are no traces of deliberate destruction, but only of abandonment. When the walls of the Nuraghi deteriorated and the upper part of the walls fell down, rather than rebuild them, the people used the stones for building their houses. The end of the Nuraghi building period, following the radical change in Sardinian society, would lead one to consider that the new social structure had renounced to the monumental features that characterized the Nuragic period proper. If you witness the new villages built at the foot of the Nuraghe, there are no buildings that can compete in size and height with the ancient towers. The new final Bronze Age society does not renounce expressions of monumentality which are now manifested by cult buildings. Sacred springs and wells, buildings with a rectangular or a circular plan can rise isolated, but more frequently appear associated to compose articulated spaces of considerable complexity. The monumentality of the structures, the wealth of the stone engravings, and the presence of particular temple decorations provide indication which can help us to reconstruct some aspects of the ceremonies which took place in such places. One cannot fail to emphasize how the context of Monte Prama in Cabras also falls within a logic of monumentalizations of effigies that are normally represented in miniature form in small bronze sculptures, i.e. in the Bronzetti, and was clearly a celebration of the power and the force of the elite. It consists of less or more 40 limestone figures which are more than 2.5 meters high. It is the celebration and exaltation of a group through warrior iconography in order to communicate an image of force and power. But I think this was already discussed in Colombia last year. The warriors are found in association with the stone models of sometimes single tower, but usually complex nuraghi, some of which have been reconstructed, but many of which are still in fragments. They seem to be designed to convey an explicit message of the connection between the two. The commissioners of Monte Prama might have been members of a family or group of aristocratic families who testified to their ethnic and cultural importance through the particular arrangement of the adjoining symmetry, the presence of symbols, the models of Nuraghi, the ostentatious exaltation of religiosity and the warrior values of the group, and thus, at the same time, emphasized the deeply rooted ascendancy in the area. The rule of the genos, evoked through the military values in the representation of the warrior ancestors, in association with the burial of highborn people, legitimized a new form of social supremacy. So, going to conclude, from the earliest stage of the so-called Nuragic period, there is evidence of a caste to represent one's identity as a family matrix through the constructions of the dwelling and the burial buildings of high monumentality. The monumentality of the towers, which must have reached, as in the case of Santuantine, 25 meters high, the complexity of an internal articulation almost labyrinthine of some structures, the elevation of the tombs to guarantee impressiveness and visibility are among the strongest and the most characteristic features of the Nuragic period stricto sensu, when social consensus appears to have been mainly enforced by monumental domestic architecture. In the successive period of the Final Bronze and the early Iron Ages, the new social organization identified the sanctuaries and the cult buildings as places to manifest aspects of political and economic power. The apparatus of the centuries reveals a high degree of complexity and monumentality, and the high investment of architectural expertise, often with the use of building material imported from other areas, and skillfully cut a wide use of decorative elements and chromatic effects obtained by using rocks of different colors. Other elements that characterize the sanctuary are special built-in stone furniture for cult practices, such as tables, vats of various sizes, cylindrical stools, bases, blocks for affixing bronze figurines, and votive swords, etc. The changes that affected Sardinian societies from the Middle and recent Bronze to Final and Early Iron Ages are reflected in the different monumental architectural manifestations, first directed at settlement sites, i.e. nuraghi and collective tombs, and later at places of worship and statuary. If the society that built the Nuragic towers is, on the basis of the available data, identifiable with the parental-based society, the subsequent building of sanctuaries and the places of worships is no longer the expression of more or less large family groups, but of communities on a territorial tribal basis that use this form of expression as an element of manifestation over their economic and social power. The Nuraghi, as it is known, have recently begun a new adventure for the recognition of the entire Nuragic heritage as a World Heritage Site, which would be added to Nuragic of Barumini, which has obtained this important designation since 1997. However, it ends the Nuraghi and the other monumental buildings still want to impress and capture our attention. Thanks for your attentions.
Well, what a great start to the afternoon. Just incredible, for me, just incredible sense of scale and complexity for these structures. And so I won't spend too much time now because we're kind of keeping to time for the moment with thoughts and questions, but move on with the afternoon. So this brings me to introduce Giovanna Fundoni, who is a research fellow in prehistory and protohistory at the University of Sassari, and who has published widely on trade and connectivity between Sardinia and the Iberian Peninsula in the Bronze and Iron Ages, and with broad interests across Mediterranean protohistory and Sardinian Nuragic culture. Giovanna has been involved in several archaeological projects and excavations in Sardinia and Minorca, and is also interested in experimental archaeology, especially in prehistoric food processing and bread making. So I present to you, Giovanna.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to be here with this interesting meeting, and I would like to thank the Italian Academy and especially Barbara Faedda for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to show you something about my island, something about archaeology and archaeological heritage of Sardinia. So when people, okay. When people think about Sardinia and its the originality and uniqueness of Nuragic cultures with no comparisons in other parts of the Mediterranean Sea, it's very easy to imagine these people isolated. It's an island, it's not very close to the mainland, so it's very easy to think they were isolated. They have original monuments, they had no contact with other parts of the Mediterranean Sea. That's false. It's the contrary. The island is quite in the middle of Mediterranean Sea, as you can see in the map. And it was connected with many other parts of the Mediterranean Sea. It had relations with Eastern Mediterranean Sea, with Greece, with Cyprus, with Northern Africa, with Sicily, and with the Iberian Peninsula. Today, I will show you something about the relations between Sardinia and the Iberian Peninsula between the late Bronze Age and the beginning of Iron Age. As you can see in this map, Sardinia is quite in the middle of Mediterranean Sea. You see, it's not very far from the Iberian Peninsula. And during the period in which lived Nuragic culture, they were totally connected. Wait. Okay, it went. Okay. We have many evidence of these relations between Sardinia and the Iberian Peninsula. They are finds, archaeological finds. We have about 100 Iberian-type bronze artifacts found in Sardinia and about 330 Sardinian pottery sherds found in Spain. But we also have Sardinian pottery and Iberian bronze artifacts found along the sea routes in other places in which the sea route passed. These bronze artifacts allowed us to understand the relations, to talk about relations between the two areas. For what concerning Iberian artifacts found in Sardinia, they are bronze artifacts, weapons, tools, other kinds of items. They are Iberian model and types, but often they are of local production, produced with local copper, for example. We have axes, bronze swords, daggers, spearheads, sickles, fibulas, spits, and some other small items, bronze items. Few of them have been analyzed, and the analysis show us a composition with Sardinian metal. So the models of these bronze artifacts come from the Iberian Peninsula, the actual Spain and Portugal. But the composition of these objects show us a Sardinian provenance, probably because this one were the finds that we have in Sardinia were reproductions of original items that were imported from the Iberian Peninsula. About these bronze artifacts, we have many kinds of swords. Iberian swords in Sardinia are the first type pistoliform swords. In the middle, we have Huelva-type swords, and then we have Montesaida swords. These kind of swords are very common in the Iberian Peninsula of late Bronze Age. We can find them especially in the southern part of Spain, in Portugal, and are the same models that you can see here, but this one have been found in Sardinia. They have been found especially in, during the last century, in the first part of last century. Few of them even at the end of the 19th century. They were studied by Fulvio Lo Schiavo, an Italian archaeologist. These are Montesaida swords, another kind of sword. This one has been object of discussion because not many experts think that they are originated from the Iberian Peninsula, but some people think that were Sardinian productions. We don't know exactly, but we have to think that in Sardinia we don't have casting molds, while in the Iberian Peninsula we have casting molds, as you can see here. And in Sardinia we have just few examples of this kind of swords, while in Spain we have a lot, and we have a very long period in which in Spain they were used, because we also have some of these swords made with iron. But in Sardinia we also have Iberian axes, like the one you can see here, socketed axles, double looped socketed axles, flanged axes, and different kinds of axes that are very common in Spain and Portugal Bronze Age. We can find them in Sardinia as other tools like sickles, different types of sickles, chisels, spits, and the items that you see on the right, that have been described as bow droners, used to drone the bow. They are very common in Portugal, and in a few cases even in Spain, and we find them only in Sardinia, not in other parts of Mediterranean Sea. This is the distribution map of Iberian bronze artifacts in Sardinia. As you can see, you can find them overspread all over the island. We found them in hoards, temples, tombs, but especially in the central part of Sardinia, because they normally have been given to the sanctuaries, to the temples of Nuragic cultures. The studies about the bronze artifacts we saw before started around the 90s of last century. But we started to pay more attention to the topic of relation between Sardinia and the Iberian Peninsula only around 2004, 2010. In that period, in Spain, a big amount of Nuragic pottery was discovered in Huelva. Huelva is a small city in the southern part of Spain, in the border with Portugal. In that place, during some excavation for public works, in 2003, a big amount of Nuragic pottery was found. And it was the starting point for the study of relations between Sardinia and the southern part of the Iberian Peninsula, and then the whole Iberian Peninsula. In Huelva, there were found a lot of different vases with very strong comparison with Sardinian pottery. They have no comparison with the local pottery, not at all. We have jugs, as the one you see on the left. We have necklet vases, the one you can see down, but you will see here better. They were big containers. We have Santimbenia amphoras. These are amphoras, big containers that were used to transport and to storage some food, wine, different things. And these amphoras are very interesting because in the past, there were found a lot of Santimbenia amphoras in southern Spain, but they were not considered Sardinian productions. They were considered Central Mediterranean origin, because in that times, these amphoras that were found in Tunisia, they were considered coming from the center of Mediterranean Sea without understanding very well the original production place. But in that period, around 2004 and 2005, we started to understand that probably they were Sardinian amphoras. Here you can see we have even some complete examples, the one you can see in Malaga, or another one that have been found in Huelva. We have many ascoid jugs. Ascoid jugs are jugs that were used to serve liquids. We have many of them were found in Huelva, the ones you see on the right, but we have a quite complete piece that was found in Cadiz, after Gibraltar, at the beginning of the Atlantic Ocean. And we have some other items that were found in Malaga. In Malaga, around 2011, when they were enlarging the Malaga airport, a big amount of Nuragic pottery was found in a local settlement with a very strong Phoenician presence. We have other vases, like the bowls you see here, and this kind of cups that were found in Malaga and Cadiz. Very interesting, one of the jugs that were found in Huelva. This jug has been found in a place in the suburbs of Huelva during excavation related to public works. In that moment, a local settlement related to a big vineyard was found, and there, in a part of this settlement, it has been found a lot of Nuragic pottery. Nuragic pottery dating to different moments, from the 10th century before Christ till the 8th century before Christ. The jug that you see on the left with the decoration on the handle with simple circles on the handle can be dated to a moment around the 10th century, around 1,000 years before Christ. That's because it was related to local pottery that has been dated very well. So this is the most ancient Nuragic pottery Nuragic find found in the Iberian Peninsula. We also have this kind of open vases that can be called pans or trays. They are very common in Nuragic Sardinia during the Bronze Age, but even in some parts, even in the beginning of Iron Age. These were baking trays. They were used to bake bread on a fireplace. So they were very common pottery vases. We found them in Huelva. Even some of them were even produced with local clay. And some in Aldovesta, in the northern part of Spain, but even in Toscanos, close to Malaga, in other places. Here you can see the distribution map of the Sardinian finds in Spain. You can see most of them are concentrated in the southern part of the peninsula, along the coast, following the sea route, coming from the Mediterranean Sea till the Atlantic Sea. Some of them are in internal parts, but in these cases, they are very close to communication ways. Even the number 2 that you see, it's about 80 kilometers from the sea, it was a place that during Bronze Age was in the sea, because that zone during Bronze Age was in a big gulf that has been covered by debris given by a big river, and now is earth. These finds have been found in coastal settlements close to harbors, in ports, sometimes even in necropolis, but in most of cases are in Phoenician settlements or local settlements with Levantine presence. But of course, we have finds in local settlements without Phoenician presence, like the one I showed you before in Huelva. And so, in conclusion, what can we tell about the Sardinian pottery found in Sardinia? Why did we find Sardinian pottery in Spain? They were probably goods exported from Sardinia, gifts to the local communities or elites, or probably there was Sardinian people staying in Spain. If we think to the closed vases, we have to divide the vases between closed vases and open vases. Closed vases, the containers, give us an important information. They were not the real exchanging good. They contained the real exchanging goods. Probably these vases, like the amphora, like the vasiacolo or necklet vases, probably they contained wine. We say it because in Sardinia wine was produced from about the 13th century before Christ. Even because we know that in some vases in Sardinia, there have been found traces of wine. But even in Huelva, you see the pottery shared on the right, this is a part of an amphora, Santimbenia amphora, and there are grape seeds. So probably they contained wine. We know that in Sardinia, some Santimbenia amphoras and some other Nuragic vases, Bronze Age or Iron Age vases, have been found with traces of wine. These vases, especially the amphoras and the necklet vases, are often associated with other kinds of vases, as the ascoid jug. Why? Probably because they were wine sets. Probably we had special wines coming from Sardinia in its containers, like the amphoras, and accompanied by the wine sets for serving them. The ascoid jug for serving wine, the cups for drinking. We have few Sardinian cups. We have one in Huelva. Probably some of them without decoration have been not recognized in the past. But often we have a relationship between amphora Santimbenia, ascoid jug, and Greek cups. Greek skiphoi, for example. So probably these kind of wine sets were mixed with pieces coming from other places. There is another possibility. Probably the wine was not the real exchanging good, but it was a gift to the local elites for concluding business between Sardinian people and Iberian groups, probably. We have another important information, not only traffic of wine, not only wine gifts, but even Sardinian people staying in the Iberian Peninsula. We have this kind of vases, I told you before, the pans or baking trays, we can call it different ways, that are not good for, are not exchanging goods. They cannot contain anything. Why are they in Spain? Why do we find them in Spain? Because somebody needed them to make bread, to prepare bread. And who could need this kind of Sardinian vases that have no comparison in Spain or in other parts of the Iberian Peninsula? Probably the same Sardinian people. Sardinian people that came to Spain for their relations, for the economical relation, searching for something. When they stayed in Spain, because ancient navigation was not like today, that we go and come back in a few days. No, during ancient navigation, you had to stay in the place for months, waiting for the right wind for coming back home. So they were hosted in local settlements. And when Sardinian people went to Spain, to the Iberian Peninsula, and were hosted in local settlements, probably they needed their personal goods. They had their personal goods, tools for cooking, for eating, for drinking. These pans were related to Sardinian people staying in the Iberian Peninsula during these relationships, during these trips. And this is very important information. There is something that helps us to confirm this thing. In Huelva, we have some original pans. The composition seems very similar to Sardinian ones, but we have some that were produced with local clay. They are totally similar to Sardinian teglie, but they have local clay. So probably there was a moment in which they had not their typical pans for baking bread, and they produced them there using the local clay. So it's another piece of the puzzle, giving us an idea of the relationship between Sardinian people and the local communities of the Iberian Peninsula. And what about the Iberian imports in Sardinia? Probably, of course, we know the bronze artifacts. We know that they imported original bronze artifacts, but especially the models, the prototypes of these bronze swords, axes, and spears, for example. They imported the original one, probably gifts, probably exchanging goods, but they reproduced them. For them, they were very important. They became a status symbol. The swords, for example. Sardinian people, before that moment, before the final Bronze Age, they had no swords, few swords. But when they started to have relations with the Iberian Peninsula, they started to have swords, and these kinds of swords, Iberian-type swords. So they imported not only goods, but even ideas, models. And of course, why did they go to the Iberian Peninsula? Because they needed something very important in that moment. Raw metal, the tin that was necessary for making bronze. Of course, they imported also a knowledge, because even now, when we go to some new place, we have ideas, we copy ideas, we see new things. In the past, it was the same. There is something that explains us better the relations and the roots between Sardinia and the Iberian Peninsula. We have Sardinian pottery in Northern Africa. Here you can see we have the same shapes, the same vases that we found in Spain. We found them in Utica, but even in the actual Tunis. And Utica finds is very interesting because you can see Sardinian pottery in association with pottery from other places. For example, Iberian pottery, local Iberian pottery. So probably the same people that went from Sardinia to the Iberian Peninsula and came back passing from Northern Africa, as you can see in the maps, here you can see the sea routes, probably traveled in groups or had the same commercial basis as Iberian people. Probably Iberian people, like Sardinian people, went to the actual Northern Africa and stopped in some important commercial ports, we can call them now. Here you can see the routes. The main routes passed along Northern Africa, but even, of course, all along Italy, and very rarely, and especially in the beginning of Iron Age, in the Balearic Islands. But you have to consider that the main routes passed through Northern Africa. Because of this, we have Sardinian pottery in Northern Africa. So, concluding, what do we know about contacts and relations between Sardinia and Iberia? We have a lot of information. We know many things. We know that there was a wine traffic. We know that there were people, Sardinian people living in Spain. We know that probably they traveled together, they had the same partnership, a sort of economic sea partnership. But there is a problem. We don't know many things about Iberian people in Sardinia. We don't have many information. In Spain, we have Nuragic, we have Sardinian pottery that show us the presence of Sardinian people, but in Sardinia, we don't have, till the moment, presence of Iberian people. We saw exchanges, not only good exchanges, but even knowledge exchange. But metal search was probably the most important input for the creation of maritime expeditions and partnership. People from Eastern Mediterranean, Central Mediterranean, from Sardinia went to the west, to the Atlantic Ocean, to the Iberian Peninsula, searching for metals, searching for tin that was very important and very rare. So everything was based on metal. Sardinian people, we don't know if they went alone or with other people. It's very probable that they navigate with other groups, with mixed provenience people. All ancient expeditions were like this, were made of people coming from different places that met together in the most important ports of that moment. Mixed sefarist groups, Sardinian, Greeks, Levantine, Iberian. We know it because normally in places like Huelva, Sardinian pottery has been found associated sometimes to Phoenician pottery, for example, or to Greek pottery, in many cases Greek pottery. So probably they traveled together, they had economical partnership, they had relations. This is the end. What can we say? This relationship started more or less around 11th century before Christ and finished around 7th century before Christ. We have the most ancient finds in Sardinia dating back to 11th century, the swords, and the last finds, the earliest finds in Sardinia that date back to the early Iron Age, and in Spain to the 7th century before Christ. It finished, the relationship finished when the Sardinian culture changed. In the early Iron Age, in a moment around 7th century before Christ, Sardinian culture went down. We have, everything changes in society, in economy, and the original Sardinian culture totally changed. And at this moment, the relationship changed, and it became everything related to Phoenician groups. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Giovanna, for what's clearly such a kind of vivid look at the big picture. On the one hand, the big picture of Sardinian connectivity. On the other hand, for painting such a human side to it, I think is very much appreciated. So our next presentation before we go to a quick break is a great pleasure to introduce Emily Holt, who is an archaeological science project officer at Carta University with specializations across environmental archaeology, zooarchaeology, and isotope analysis. Her research addresses human-environment dynamics in the Sardinian Bronze Age. In Sardinia, Emily co-directs the Prane Sidi project excavations at Sarconca e Sacresia, an archaic Nuragic tower on the city plateau in the Marmilla region of central Sardinia. It must take you a while to get through that. Her work has received support from the Fulbright Foundation, the NSF, Mellon Foundation, and the European Research Council. Old friend, good to see you here.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming to hear us all talk today. And thank you so much to the Italian Institute for having us, especially to Paolo, Barbara, and Abigail for all their hard work making this happen. It's just an incredible honor to be here today talking with all of my wonderful colleagues. So, as Stephen told you, as a researcher, I'm broadly interested in human-environment dynamics. Yeah, there we go, excellent. In the Nuragic culture, and I'm pursuing kind of 3 related research programs with those research ends. First, I co-direct Progetto Prane Sidi with Mauro Pera, my wonderful Sardinian colleague, and I also do want to mention that project receives incredible support from the Comune di Sidi and our wonderful mayor, Marco Pisanu, without whom I could not, that project would never have happened. That project excavates a large naviform room, so kind of calling back to the fantastic introduction that Anna gave us to the early Nuragic culture and the early monuments, the archaic monuments. So it excavates a large naviform room at Nuraghi Sakonca on the city plateau. Sakonca dates to the early development of the Nuragic culture, and which is something I'm really interested in. I'm always very interested in how things originate. So I was really attracted to kind of the early stuff that's not as pretty as the older stuff or the later stuff, but is very cool. And I'm very lucky at this site. We have a lot of really deep, well-stratified deposits that are providing an interesting opportunity to understand diachronic change at an important site in an early settlement system. My second project is I also direct the Prentice City Landscape Project, which is surveying the plateau and its surroundings, and I'm delighted that there, Julia Gustafson has now joined the project as my survey manager. She's a PhD student at Cambridge, and she's bringing a very cool landscape and monumentality and memory aspect to my environmental focus. And then finally, I also pursue isotope analysis of the fauna from Sakonca. Hopefully we'll get some results by the EAAs this summer. And those results will help us understand things like foddering regimes, pastoralism, transhumance, and other animal husbandry practices at the site. So this is where the city plateau is in Sardinia, right there, kind of in the south central part of the island. And this is the plateau itself. It's kind of got this weird L shape. And there are 16 of these early Nuragic monuments, these archaic Nuraghi, around the outside of the plateau. And then a really fantastic giant's tomb there in the center. And the site that I specifically am focusing on today for my talk, the site that I excavate, is Sakonca, and it's that one right there, kind of in the north. So, to put kind of all of this in a perspective, the city plateau and Sakonca are situated in a really rich Nuragic landscape. The light-colored area here is a 5-kilometer buffer around the plateau, so I always kind of start with that because 5 kilometers is about how far people will walk there and back in a day before the energetics get really complicated and you start needing to like pack your lunch and stay over. So that's kind of like everybody that they could have been in contact with just within a day's easy walk, which, as you can see, is just an incredible number. Don't think that this landscape is empty. It is absolutely not. I just haven't gotten around to putting all the points in yet. So the occupation continues further than that 5-kilometer buffer, but I just wanted you to see how connected that settlement system would have been. And then, of course, want to point out that we are basically neighbors to Nuraghi. You can see Nuraghi from Sakonca on a clear day. And so although the two sites don't overlap very much in time, my site is earlier, Nuraghi is a bit later, and there's a small overlap. This is all kind of taking place in the same region. So here's an aerial photograph of Sakonca, so you can kind of see what that looks like. I'll tell you a little bit more about the structure itself in a moment, but I want to start off by discussing my work on the city plateau and what it suggests for the inhabitants of Sakonca and how they adapted to their surroundings, and with kind of 3 major components to that. And the first big one being water. How are these people getting water on the plateau? So there are very few springs on the city plateau. There's really only 2 that are actually on the plateau, and they're not on the top, they're down on the sides. So they're not wonderfully accessible if you're up here at one of the Nuraghi. The closest one to Sakonca is 550 kilometers away. So, it's a good bit of a hike. You have to go downhill, you have to go back uphill. So it's not the most convenient kind of water source for folks on the plateau. So it's not an impossible distance, but having at least some water closer to hand would certainly have been helpful, at least to do things like perhaps engage in agriculture, bring water to your animals, things like that. So this is a question I've been exploring in my survey project. And just here's a picture of us doing some drone photography for photogrammetry, which I'll bring back in a minute. And just kind of starting out, an examination of a topographic map suggests that the Nuraghi were all situated in places where there were seasonal water flows. So this is probably related to fractures in the impermeable basalt bedrock that forms the top of the plateau. And these fractures would have channeled rainwater to specific places on the plateau where then it would go over the sides. Probably also there's a little bit of topographical difference in the plateau, which would also be directing where the rainwater goes. But we're able to identify these flows by seeing the paleochannels that are cut into the side of the plateau by the movement of water over time. So this would have created really favorable conditions for water capture, which could have been done in all kinds of different ways, of small-scale water capture, but still very effective. So survey on the plateau has identified that many of the Nuraghi do have water collection features built nearby. There's one that is very close to Seconquiscresia. There's Seconquiscresia. Here's our little water feature there. This feature is kind of interesting. It's not super pretty, but it has a cool built kind of doorway structure there and a little bit of roofing that's been constructed over it. I check it every summer when I go back, and it frequently contains water, even in less rainy years. So it's still actually quite effective at capturing water. Several other of the Nuraghi also have water capture features built near them or onto them. This is Nuraghi Supardu, which is pretty close. There's Seconquiscresia, there's Supardu there. And it has a little water collection feature built directly onto the side of the Nuraghi. So here's an image of it during a drier year. Nice, easy to see, not overgrown and unfortunately dry. But here it is during a wet year, substantially overgrown, but now holding water. I also go back and check this feature every summer when I return and see if it has water. And I will say it only contains water during rainy years. So it's not quite as effective still, but it's got, we think, a lot of time in there. And then Nuraghi Samamunaya also has a water collection feature built next to it, again, kind of in proximity to Seconquiscresia. Here's the water feature built next to the Nuraghe. And this one is one of the better preserved features. It has really several clear courses of stone. And this is a success story. I've checked it every year for several years after we identified it. It's never had water until last year, which was a super rainy year in Sardinia. And I went out on a day when it was actually raining, crossing my fingers, and I was rewarded. It was full of water. So I actually have an indication that that feature also is still successfully collecting water under certain conditions. Now, there's always the problem of dating stone structures. These collection features may not date to the Nuragic period. This is an ongoing kind of discussion I've got with some of my colleagues, whether they are or not. Shepherds in the landscape frequently build water collection features like this for their animals, and they certainly could have been built more recently by shepherds. I think the elaboration over the feature at Seconquiscresia would make it actually rather hard for sheep to drink from it. I have seen sheep all over my site many, many times, and I've never seen sheep drinking from that thing. So, I don't know, I'm a little bit dubious. But whether or not these features are definitively Nuragic, they show that the Nuraghi were built in places conducive to water capture. And it's likely they would have had systems of some kind to take advantage of water collection, whether it was for small-scale water capture like you see here, or if it was terracing along the sides of the plateau to capture water to have more successful agriculture. Also a strong possibility. We do find terracing on the slopes of the plateau around some of the Nuraghi. But it does show that, in general, the sites for these Nuraghi are being selected with water in mind. They're very aware of that, and they want to maximize that, what is kind of a scarce resource in a dry environment, in a place where the nearest springs are kind of far away. So I'm continuing to explore the possibility by investigating water flows through hydrological and topographical modeling of the plateau. We're currently testing a digital elevation model, which is this thing here. It just looks like a picture, but it's actually got all kinds of great 3D data in there. This was created with the drone photogrammetry that you saw a picture of earlier. And this is part of the plateau that includes 3 of the Nuraghi, including 2 of the largest that are not Seconquiscresia, Safogaya and Pranukasti. Hopefully, the photogrammetry DEMs will be sufficient to reconstruct the rainwater flows, but there is the issue of they can't kind of scoop off the greenery. So we may get some false topography where it's actually recording the shrubs and not the bedrock. So we're going to test this. We're working on that now. If it doesn't turn out to work, then we'll look into getting LiDAR of the plateau, which can actually remove the vegetation and get a more direct picture of the topography itself. So one adaptation to the plateau that the inhabitants of Seconquiscresia had was site selection for rainwater collection, and most likely a system for collecting that rainwater so that not all the water had to be brought from the spring. Other questions about how the inhabitants of Seconca-Secresia adapted to their environment require excavation to answer. So we are back at Seconca-Secresia itself. Looking at Seconca-Secresia from above, we can see that it was built in 3 phases. We have a central phase here that includes roofed chambers. We have a northern platform here that may have included roof chambers as well, but this part's pretty collapsed in most places, so we can't really tell, but they might have been like those corridor-type chambers that Anna was showing us. And then we have a large southern phase that included a small circular structure here, as well as quite a large naviform room here. So the naviform room is a little hard to see. The circular structure is easy, but the naviform room, maybe if I give it an outline, you can kind of see a little bit better what that is. So the circular structure and the naviform room have been the focuses of Progetto Pranesiti, which I started, like I said, with my wonderful colleague Mauro Pera back in 2009. So we excavated Trench 1 and Trench 2 from 2009 to 2011. Unfortunately, Trench 2 had been reoccupied in Punic and Roman times, and the deposits were completely mixed. The new inhabitants had come in, dug everything up, mixed it with their own trash, and then used it to kind of resurface the floors. So it was impossible to tease any. I mean, we can identify the different types of pottery, but we can't use the animal bones. We can't use the carbonized seeds because the dating is not secure. So that's unfortunate. In good news, Trench 1 provided over 1 meter of well-stratified nuragic deposits from which we were able to get lots of great data, lots of great information. And then in 2022, we also restarted the project with the goal of finishing the excavation of the naviform room, and we've now opened Trench 3. Let's see. There we go. There's the trenches. I thought I had done that. There's a little part here that we can't excavate for safety reasons because there's this overhang of rock, so we're kind of afraid of it falling down. But we're going to, when we finish the project, excavate almost the entirety of that room. So, the site, like I said, dates from the Middle Bronze Age into the very beginning of the Late Bronze Age, and we've done quite a lot of radiocarbon modeling to try and pinpoint exactly where that is. As you can see, we've got kind of 6 different possible models up there, but we can pretty much say that it dates from about 1750 to about 1300 BCE, so solidly that Middle Bronze Age with a small component of the Late or Recent Bronze Age in the upper strata. For anyone who's interested, we have recently published this. You can consult it. And actually, Luca Lai did a lot of the radiocarbon modeling, so if you have complex radiocarbon questions, I will refer you to him. So, like I said, Trench 1 provided a wealth of materials to analyze, thousands of sherds, thousands of animal bones, obsidian, ceramic, stone, and bone artifacts, as well as environmental samples. And the analysis of all of this material is ongoing, but we've been able to identify some interesting patterns so far. So, food. For most of the analyses, we're comparing Phase 2 and Phase 4 of Trench 1. So these phases represent occupation of the room itself and consist of multiple fairly thin packed earth floor layers and hearths. So when we, as archaeologists, when we want to look at change over time, we want to be sure to compare like types of deposition with like types of deposition so we don't get false patterns that are created by depositional behaviors. For example, Phase 1 of Trench 1 includes a lot of filling in the cracks in the bedrock with midden material, just huge. They clearly took just a midden dump and then used it to fill in all the rocks. So in that situation, we get really much larger fragments of pottery, much bigger pieces of animal bone, and if we threw that in with the other comparisons, it would really skew our analysis. So we want to try and keep things like with like. Comparing the 2 direct occupation phases, we find what we would expect, a lot of dependence on ovicaprids, so animals that are going to be well adapted to a dry environment and to kind of foraging in that dry environment, eating the scrubby plants that grew on the plateau. But there was still some use of pigs and cattle and a little bit of hunting. At this phase, in Phase 2, the hunting's mostly of small things, Prologus sardis, which is like this little pika animal. It's now extinct, and as well as birds. So there are differences, though, between the 2 phases. In the second occupation phase, we see a decrease in the ovicaprids and more use of pigs and cattle, despite the fact that that would have been more labor-intensive in a dry environment. There's also slightly less hunting, but an introduction of deer, which we don't see at all in Phase 2. So this suggests possibly the development of a more preference-based animal economy, where people are making their choices not just based on adaptation, but also based on what they like. Pigs and cattle, like I said, would have been more labor-intensive to raise in a dry environment, And deer were probably not common on the plateau itself at this time. Our environmental evidence suggests it was more scrubby than it was forested. So hunting them would have required hunting parties traveling to the appropriate habitats, taking time and energy. Now, if you look at those numbers, what I have currently studied, and this is about 30 to 40% of the assemblage, doesn't provide a huge assemblage of identifiable remains. So we want to check that somehow, and we can check it with the unidentifiable remains, this is research I'm doing. I'm the zooarchaeologist for the project, and when I'm looking at things that can't be identified to species because they don't have diagnostic parts on the bones, I can still look at basically the circular kind of circumference and thickness and determine if it's a small mammal, a medium mammal, or a large mammal. And so that's enough for me to look at the data and get kind of a confirmation of what I was seeing from the identifiable bone, because we've got a lot of medium, which would include both sheep and goat and pigs, and a smaller number of small and large, and we get that large increasing at the expense of the medium, and that's seeing those cattle and deer coming more into the economy. We also do flotation, so we recover a lot of carbonized seeds, and these carbonized seeds, these macrobotanical remains, also show some interesting patterns. We see pretty much what we'd expect to see, with a lot of dependence on wheat and barley, classic, with legumes and fruits also making a component in the diet. So we have grape seeds, we don't have a lot, we have some, and we have some olive pits and things like that. So in phase 2, there's kind of a more varied plant diet and more emphasis on barley, in comparison to in phase 4, the barley emphasis goes down in comparison to the wheat. There's a lot fewer legumes, and the fruits go almost completely out. So this is also perhaps related to food preference. Wheat tends to be preferred by people because it's got more sugar in it, so we like that. But barley is more resistant to drought. So they're definitely, again, making choices about preferencing something that they want to eat over something that's necessarily 100% adapted to their environment. Phytolith analysis, and phytoliths refer to basically tiny fossils that plants make when they grow. They suck up silica from the soil, and the silica hardens inside the cells of the plant, and then we get that preserves really well in the soil. So the phytolith analysis from the site is at an early stage, but it indicates similar results to the macrobotanical. It supports an agricultural strategy based on grain, and we find the presence of something called elongate dendritics, which are forms that occur in the husks of grass. So, the bits around the wheat. And those occur in smaller quantities than what we call elongate smooths, which are forms that are found in the leaves and the stems. So what this tells us is that they are bringing the whole plant, stems and all, into the site, and they're processing it on site, probably because they want they want the chaff, they want the straw for other purposes, for bedding, maybe for fodder, things like that. So a final concern for how they adapted to the plateau is the nature of their craft production. And we have a lot of evidence for textile production, including spindle whorls and loom weights, and we have quite a few bone tools that may have a function in textile production, but that is going to require a little bit more analysis. Textiles were very likely made from wool, but may also have been made from some plant materials. And textile production at Seconca probably represents a fairly local activity. We saw that they were raising lots of sheep and goat. They're probably then also just processing that fiber into the clothes that they wear. On the other hand, the on-site production of obsidian tools, which we find tons of, represents an activity that would have required either travel or trade. Not really far trade, definitely not to Iberia, but still away from the plateau itself. We get a good number of what we call prismatic blades, which are these things up here. We also get some lunates, which are classic on Nuragic sites, these things. And what's really fun about this is we know that the production, or at least retouching, resharpening the blade after you kind of fragment it, took place on site because we recover what we call microdebitage, tiny, tiny bits of obsidian flakes. When we do the flotation to get those carbonized seeds, we save the stuff that sinks to the bottom, sort through it, and that's where we find evidence that they're doing the obsidian production on site. So we've brought in, just recently, this past year, something called portable X-ray fluorescence, which is a way of analyzing the elemental composition of stuff. So we did PXRF on the obsidian, and we've only done a few pieces so far, and this is just very preliminary. But so far, it indicates similarities with a particular obsidian flow, the SC obsidian flow on Monte Arci. Monte Arci is not, so there's Conques Crazy there, and now this is Monte Arci. And the SC flow is here, right outside of a town called Pau. So, and this would make sense, as this flow is really only about 13 kilometers. Oh, that was a little early. As it's only about 13 kilometers as the crow flies, that's what that indicates there. So it would have been accessible in a fairly short journey. So like I said, we've only started to look at a small number of tools, and this research is ongoing. We're really hoping that as the research progresses, we might actually find that there's a kind of selective use of different obsidian types for different tools. So far, we haven't seen that yet. When we reopened excavations in 2022, we encountered a very different type of deposition from what we encountered in Trench 1. In Trench 1, we had to dig through a lot of collapse, big rocks that had fallen off the Nuraghi, and then once we had cleared that off, we came down on these habitation layers and hearths and things like that. In Trench 3, there was essentially none of that collapse, no overburden. The archaeological sediments were immediately exposed the minute we put a trowel on the ground, and the sediment is extremely ashy and appears to be the remains of fires that were kindled elsewhere, burned elsewhere, and then were cleaned up and dumped into the naviform room as a form of waste disposal once the naviform room was out of use. So there's been tons of this ashy sediment. This is us digging it late in the 2023 season. You can see this is it there. This is it like where it was back in 2022. We've dug through all of that. We're still not to the bottom of it. We hope to get there this year. So there's just tons of this sediment. And one really interesting find that has come out of Trench 3 has been this beautifully preserved Nuragic dagger. The dagger has now undergone conservation, but we haven't had a chance to analyze the bronze yet, so no results there. But at least hints that maybe they're doing some bronze working on the site. So in addition to the dagger and this very ashy sediment, we also find a substantial number of these slag fragments. These are, they don't photograph super well, but they're light and bubbly and very and iridescent. They're very strange. So we decided to do some PXRF on these, and they suggest that these are fragments of a superheated basalt that has gotten so hot that it has started to melt and bubble. Such high temperatures are not consistent with pottery making. The temperatures of that high would just melt the pottery, but they are consistent with something like metalworking. So our current hypothesis is that they were doing some kind of metalworking somewhere near the excavation and then dumping the waste products into the room. In looking for this evidence of metalworking, we did PXRF analysis of some of the grindstone tools to see if they had been used in processing metals. So here's all the different kinds of metals that we would expect if they were working, if they were doing metal. We see that we find a lot of this copper, but none of the other stuff. So that's a little bit weird. We also did PXRF on the excavated stratigraphy with similar results. We got a lot of copper, but an absence of the other metalworking materials. So the sediments on site included very large amounts of these mineral concretions as well. We thought they were related to craft production. They probably are, but not in the way we thought. They actually form because water percolates through the ashy sediments and washes out all the calcium silicates, which then glom together. So I'll go really fast. Adapting to the plateau, what we've got evidence for so far is site selection for natural rainwater flows, built-stone features for small-scale water collection, probably, maybe also terracing. Animal husbandry adapted to little water, but this changes over time. Same thing with the plant diet. It becomes less varied over time and slightly less adapted to drought-resistant, or to drought conditions. In situ craft production, but that also involves some going farther afield to get your craft materials, and some kind of high-temperature production activity, which my current hypothesis is maybe they're actually just bringing in copper ingots and working the copper ingots, and none of the other metals show up. It's possible. So there's still lots of questions to answer, and you are welcome to ask me about those during our coffee break and during the question and answer, but I'm gonna close now because I'm over time. Thank you so much for your attention, and I do want to thank the millions of people who have given money and time and effort to this project, but very especially, I want to thank the wonderful community of City where I work. I absolutely couldn't do it without them, and I want them to know that. So thank you to City. All right.
Thank you, Emily. Obviously, a very spectacular work, and I think we'll have lots of questions for the later session. Okay, it's my great pleasure to introduce to the lectern now Luca Lai, who's an assistant professor of archaeology at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. An anthropologist with a research focus on the archaeology of the Western Mediterranean, Luca's undertaken seminal work on unstable isotopic analyses applied to the investigation of human diet, ecology, and animal management, and the intersection of culture and climate change. His work has received support from the NSF, the Sardinian region, the University of Cagliari, and the Isaac Newton Trust. Luca, moreover, cultivates side interests in mortuary archaeology, Sardinian history, Indigenous America, linguistics, and decolonizing perspectives. Looking forward to this, Luca. Welcome.
Thank you for your attention. Thanks later. The outline of my talk that is a little, might seem a little miscellaneous, maybe it is, attempts to bring some of the new results from my research, but also just some different ideas and trends, and possibly tie them into my research and see how we can, to some degree, give some answers. So, just to give a little bit of a background to Sardinian archaeology, especially Nuragic archaeology, there is definitely the importance of the past in how we understand the Nuragic culture. Then we'll go into the relevance today and enter into a little bit of the issues where I bring some data. And so here there will be the second part, which is the main part of my presentation, with different things relatively new. I guess most of those from cyber-isotopic research are out of my research, but there is also ancient DNA news in the last few years, and then just several other questions that where we can actually sort of integrate these different aspects and try to make them illuminate each other in some way. So. The foundations, and here I'm following a little bit of, there is clearly interpretations that differ not only on Nuragic culture, but also on views on Nuragic culture by different scholars. And here I'm mostly following work by Alfonso Stiglitz in sort of putting in a context the birth of Sardinian archaeology, and especially the archaeology of Nuraghi. So after the end of the so-called Sardinian Revolution in the late 1700s, there was a period of a lot of reaction to many of the instances of Sardinian sort of self-government. The House of Savoy was also very active in many ways in agricultural policies, taxation, but also in historical resources. So they actually protected, for the first time with legislation, also archaeological remains. Now the first, possibly, again, these things are a matter of interpretation, but possibly the first Sardinian archaeologist that had sort of national or international renown was Giovanni Spano. And his view of Sardinia actually following trends that were common in the 1800s. He definitely wanted to promote Sardinia. At the same time, he was very much inserted into Italian nationalism and the sort of creation of the nation. So, in fact, in the 1800s, there is also a few events that are really glamorous about forgeries that in Sardinia attempted to create an Italian past where they didn't see it. And so in order to be a little more noble and more Italian, that there were fake Nuragic bronzes that for a long time were believed to be true and so on. But also medieval documents creating fake sagas on Sardinian medieval times and so on. So this was sort of the environment, the cultural environment. Then we get to the 1900s where Taramelli is really possibly the founder of a lot of Nuragic terminology. He's, in many ways, someone considering, together with Liliu, the real founders of the Nuragic definition, of in a way, of the invention or creation. In fact, there is a lot of deconstruction of many of these ideas. But definitely, Taramelli had still some of this idea of race, which in Sardinia, especially in the 30s, became tied to this idea of continuity of this race, as if isolated from the rest of the Mediterranean, with a lot of continuity with the present day. And so the Nuragic civilization was definitely, in Taramelli's heart, was very important, but was also, again, tied to Italian nationalism, and so also, with the fascist regime, but with some elements also of independence in thinking and his formulations. So we get to Liliu, and there are several authors that are, again, in the last few decades, deconstructing also some of Liliu's elements. And definitely this is an incredible intellectual that probably Sardinia hasn't had any after him. His background comes from art history and sort of a classical kind of archaeology. But also there are different elements from the anthropology of the time, historical views, for example, also the idea of the mountains as a very conservative area. So he had some ideas that were also strengthened by a lot of his incredible broad studies and reading. Now, from this also come, for example, some of the elements that we see in the Nuragic sort of reconstruction that in Liliu. For example, we have some really strong ideas about Nuraghi being fortresses, castles, and then also this idea, as Anna Depalmas already underlined, the hierarchy, and so this idea that this society was actually divided into classes and very specialized. Clearly, all of this has a lot of baggage. So Liliu was in many ways sort of yielding to the idea that in order to be a great civilization, Sardinia needed to have some of the elements of possibly the Eastern civilizations. And so this idea that progress could only come with hierarchy, and it was also related to definitely architecture. So architecture definitely is in Liliu, like Taramelli, the center of the identity of this culture. And we'll see this is a problem because it's not as straightforward. Now, the other side of Liliu is actually how he underlined the difference and the alterity of Sardinian and Nuragic art and construction. So he calls it a barbarian art, and he also formulates this idea of a resistential constant, as if Sardinia, after the Nuragic times, had basically resisted change. And so the identity of Sardinia in Liliu is very much tied to the Nuragic times, as if this foundation was at the root of Sardinian difference up to pretty much today. So together with this, also something that we haven't seen in archaeologists afterwards is a substantial political activism. Liliu was also a politician in the Sardinian Regional Council, but also in several endeavors for the Sardinian language, and he really embraced a type of independentism. Liliu was not for the immediate secession, like some considered radicals at the time, but he did say for the future that was Sardinian destiny in a way. So this said, clearly the Nuraghi became, thanks to Liliu, some of the pillars of Sardinian identity today. And this is really the only nice picture I show, and it's a tattoo where someone had in their shoulder a Nuragic bronze together with Sardinia. And you can see, several of these things, even with, especially today together with the Nuraghe in general, also Monte Bramma, features in reproductions everywhere, even on people's bodies. So clearly, Nuraghi becomes a bit the ambassador of Sardinian heritage. At the same time, there is some the discrepancy between these movements towards reappropriation of identity, but also the lack of interest that, in general, the Italian government has shown, and in many ways, even the Sardinian political class has shown for their own heritage. And so, for example, Nuraghi rarely feature in school books as anything more than a couple of pages. And there is also movements trying to address this problem. And in general, Sardinian language and culture are still very much marginalized in our system. So there is definitely this disconnect, and therefore we see a lot of success of pseudo-archaeological theories that generate, again, a bit like in the times of the Falsi d'Arborea in the 1800s, these fake narratives that are sometimes baseless on Sardinia dominating the Bronze Age Mediterranean or having, this outstanding role and taking as a reality, for example, the identification of Sardinian with the Chardin, which is still instead debated, and we'll get to that in a second. So, again, what are some of the views that Liliu proposed and some other views that we can then also test with some new techniques? For example, the prevalence of pastoralism, stable isotopes, and there are techniques where you can actually see if people were mostly having animal products, and so they were basing their economy on livestock rather than farming. There is also different interpretations that are from emphasizing, if not hierarchy, at least inequality. And so emphasizing the fact that from very early, even in the late early Bronze Age, according to some, there was already some marked inequality. Other studies fairly recently, in the last possibly 10, 15 years, have even suggested that Nuragic culture would be actually one of the rare examples globally of societies that were able to produce monumental architecture and being very complex, but without hierarchy, without actual centralization. So a bit of a culture with no bosses, but where people could actually get together and build very significant things. Some other ideas in Liliu, but again, not only Liliu, because this is, it's pretty broad understanding of European prehistory, trend towards patriarchal, patrilineal, meaning that there is a lineage that's traced through the father and power to the father, and also the residence is maintained through the male line. Other questions, the active role or in long-distance contacts that clearly Giovanna Fundoni highlighted, they are real. What was the role of Sardinians? Were they traveling or not? And so we have some elements from archaeology. Isotopes can tell us something else, even if we're not sure yet. And then even broader problem, archaeology is sometimes caught up into understanding local dynamics, but there is bigger problems, like when we talk about the fall of the Roman Empire or things that are big, like the crisis of the late Bronze Age. Well, Sardinia also has some kind of a crisis. It's not a distraction like some of the Mycenaean palaces or the Hittite Empire, but there was definitely a big change in the final Bronze Age, where we see, in some cases, better, in some cases it's not as clear, but we see a profound change in Nuragic society, and with a lot of abandonment of many sites, or at least a different kind of frequentation. So we'll see some of these things also under the light of memory, and especially burials, hegemony, and possible resistance. So the technique, the method of stable isotopes, just to really sum it up very shortly, it's basically the principle that we are made of what we eat. and drink. So the chemical signature of whatever surrounds us, and of course, especially what we put into our mouths and we digest, that goes into our tissues to actually build them. And so that signature in different foods can be also detected predictably. So basically we use different isotopes. Those that I used for the most part are carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen from bone collagen and apatite, so the organic part of bone and the mineral part of bone. There is clearly many other tissues that are usually less available in archaeology because they just decompose and we don't have them. But stable isotopes are basically this. They are different different types of elements that we find in different ratios, and these ratios are specific in a certain environment of different elements, especially in reference to the food chain. So basically, we can trace how much of different foods people were eating on an average basis, because clearly bone remodels slowly. So they are really, in a way, we have from paleobotanical remains and faunal remains, we have the menu. We are basically deciding with these stable isotopes to explore how much they were eating of different things, and so reconstruct past economies. And that was a map of the sites analyzed so far through several projects. So just to be even a little more clear, this is an example of an ecosystem, and it's just modern foods from the United States, where you can see also one standard way to actually arrange the values and read them. We have carbon here and nitrogen isotopic values from collagen, and along this diagonal line, you really see the food chain. So we have plants, and then animals that eat plants, and then in this case we have humans that eat animals and plants, and so on. And then as we go higher, it's marine ecosystems, because all these intervals are different levels in the food chain. In the sea, clearly there is many more levels, because there is little fish that eat smaller fishes, and then bigger fish that eats the smaller fish, and so on. There is many more levels. But just to make it short, in archaeology, we need to have, ideally, the different elements of the chain. This is very rare. It is a problem when we have only one, and unfortunately that's the case for most of the Nuragic sites, because the ritual in Nuragic times didn't involve any food offerings or any grave goods that are related to food. They might be related to food, but they are only pottery, and so we don't have really a lot of these. In some cases, it might be just that they haven't been analyzed and they were not available. But so what about the prevalence of pastoralism that for Liliu was a really strong point in Nuragic society? Well, we have very little, unfortunately. So the only few indirect clues are one dog at one site, where we have this interval in nitrogen samples with the consumed. So the dog is considered an analog to humans. And we have this value here, roughly 4 per meal difference, that seems actually compatible with a significant amount of animal foods. At Montebrama, there is one cattle that, however, is not even from the same phase of the humans. So we are really, in a way, comparing forcibly what we have, which is not ideal. And in this case, the interval, at least with some of the individuals that should be more having terrestrial diets, is pretty small. So in general, though, if we compare with sites where we do have animals, we definitely see that these values at Nuraghi Rubiu seem to compare better with a definitely pastoral site like this Bell Beaker one. And other sites actually with smaller values, instead we read as much more plant-based. So we have very little. About, in general, how different animals were managed as well. The species, Nuraghe rubio, don't seem to be so differentiated as we do see them in the Copper Age. So the idea is that there was a pretty open landscape with different kinds of species that were sort of grazing more or less freely. But we do have distinct cattle values to two different clusters. So some cattle were probably kept for meat and possibly milk, but others were kept just like in traditional ethnographic life in the Mediterranean. They were kept for labor, for plowing and for pulling carts. So definitely different things. Clearly there is still the problem that we have so little. Nuraghe rubio is one site, we have a few more, but how representative they are, clearly we have in Nuraghe rubio a highland site. Comparing with sites in the plains, like for example Barumini area, is definitely problematic. What about social inequality? It's difficult clearly, but one way that we can explore this through stable isotopes, again here is standard deviation of nitrogen, is by seeing how different the diet is within each site, with each group, okay? So imagine a group that can be from a few to several tens individuals. If their diet was very diverse, then they have different access to resources. If their diet was very tight and homogeneous, then we think there is more food sharing and possibly less differences. Now, what we see over time here in this chart is definitely, this goes, as you can see here, from Neolithic times to Copper Age, and then around the transition between Copper Age and the early Bronze is the period where we see the highest difference in nitrogen values, in standard deviation of the nitrogen values. Whereas in Nuragic times, this goes down again, and this is just a detail of early Bronze and Bell Beaker, and here is Nuragic time, so Middle Bronze Age through the Iron Age. So definitely, it seems like there is a more, like the difference is less in diet, so a little more equal access to resources. Now, if we look at within the Nuragic sites, and these again, these are not individual, but they are averages of sites. So it's way more data points than they look. But here, for example, we see that nitrogen in general goes up over time. And again, we have the problem of not having the animals to compare because the whole ecosystem can shift. Even if we correct it for geography, there is still a slight slope up. And then if we consider again the standard deviation, it seems like it's slowly going up again. So within the Nuragic trajectory, we have again an increase in diversity, which might possibly go along with the idea of more aristocracies in the final Bronze and early Iron Age. But at the same time, there is a lot of problems with correlation of data that that may provide false evidence, because in reality here we have the majority of sites from the final Bronze and early Iron Age are from the coast. The rest are more from the interior. So there might be differences that are related more to geography than they are just to a change over time. So that only future studies will establish that. Also, there is this idea that in the literature that that the giant's tombs could not have contained all the dead. Giant's tombs are those tombs that were shown that are collective tombs where we know several hundred individuals could be buried. But the point is there is no difference, at least isotopically, that we can tell so far between burials in caves and in giant's tombs. So I will try to go a little faster here. One idea about society and how it was organized, so patriarchal, patrilineal, and so on, was addressed also by DNA studies. And in this case, there was a substantial confirmation because there is much more the same sort of homogeneity of haplogroups within each site in the male individuals rather than females. So it seems like there is actually a founder effect. Very few males compared to the females actually were at the origin. And so this is sort of more compatible with a fairly recent migration. So there is a little bit of disconnect because on one side, there is a continuity apparently with the Neolithic DNA, and so Sardinia basically is one of the considered one of the most conservative areas for DNA, with modern Sardinians having this DNA that's very similar to the Iceman. But there is something that here doesn't explain the change in the archaeological record, and also some of this. Other attempted correlations have been found or not found, for example, between males and females. This is just one example at this site, but here, for example, there was a difference in by pathological conditions. So we don't go into that, which is kind of peripheral. Also, some potential elements to understand migration and residence. Here is, we see Monte Bramma, which is this incredible site. The chronology in reality is still to be figured out because it's very unclear. There is several radiocarbon dates, but no clear pattern, at least according to Usai, who excavated it. There is definitely evidence for migration in general, or not migration, for contacts in general. Definitely, when we did stable isotopes on Monte Bramma, the values were out of the normal range for Sardinia and for regular C3 environments, terrestrial. So all these individuals appear to either have consumed marine resources, unlike everybody else pretty much in Sardinian prehistory. The other explanation is that these individuals may have spent some of their lives elsewhere. And so we see the effect of a different area that's actually leaving a trace on the bones. So clearly this, because of the direction of the change in values, could have been more southerly, easterly in drier environments. So if basically these individuals spent some time in Sicily, in Crete, Cyprus, or so on, they would have values possibly compatible with these. Now, the pattern is not as clear from apatite, but there is definitely, the wells, the shafts have values that differ from the Tronchetti necropolis. So this is really under investigation. Very quickly, the final Bronze Age, there's different ideas. Some of the interpretations leave aside climate change as if it didn't happen or we don't have enough evidence. We actually do have enough evidence, but we tried to see if we had evidence in Sardinia. And besides single site possibilities, not certainties, like here in Sedda Sagodeba, where the last individuals have values compatible with drier climates, but we do have a long series of many sites where the two peaks that you see here and here, they do actually coincide with the 4.2 and 3.2 kilo-year events that have been underlined in the Eastern Mediterranean and in many areas in the Northern Hemisphere. So again, there seems to be an effect of climate change. Of course, it doesn't mean it was necessarily change in society, but there was some constraining effect. And finally, just other elements on giants' tombs. There is this idea that giants' tombs are different and special from previous burials in caves. My idea is that actually they represent caves where there were no caves. And then they may have become a standard kind of burial. But at least in some cases we see, for example, in the Seulo area, we see that there is no burials in caves exactly in the period when giants' tombs were most popular, and then there is again burial from the final Bronze and Iron Age. So data are not clear, definitely, but I think there is a possibility for something that can be interpreted differently. And also there is a few individuals, for now very few, that might be, again, a coincidence or possibly the beginning of a pattern. In Punic times, individuals that are buried in Nuragic burials, in Nuragic tombs. So, whereas later there is just reuse that seems a little more occasional and in Roman times and so on, the fact that we find, especially this is very interesting, a burial in Montebrama that's been dated twice, and it's just Punic age. So definitely, should I close here? Yes. So we can. There is different things that basically, in this case, I try to put together these elements to just reconstruct, even at the local scale, possible evolution of a landscape in different ways. And this is it. The last slides are actually for the discussion and just points of possible discussion. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for the organizers and everything. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Luca. The final talk is in Italian. So those of you who need some help with the headset for the translations, these will be handed around. Just sing out. This brings us to our final presentation for today. I'd like to welcome Caterina Liliu, who's leading expert on the archaeology of Sardinia, not just for having been born at Barumini itself, but for having published important work on her Gesturi archaeological site census project, as well as for the votive finds on the Villanova Forum on the Villanova Forum Museum. Caterina has served as an official for the autonomous region of Sardinia, where she was involved in projects concerning the enhancement of Sardinian cultural heritage and museums. She's on the board of the Barumini Sistema Cultura Foundation, where she deals with scientific and cultural projects, particular development of the Casa Zapata Museum and the Nuraxi UNESCO site. Welcome, Caterina.
Patrimonio dello Stato italiano che lo tutela e lo valorizza attraverso il Ministero della Cultura. Sorge a meno di 1 chilometro dal paese di Barumini, un centro agricolo, piccolo centro agricolo collocato nella regione storico-geografica della Marmilla, situata nella fascia centro-meridionale della Sardegna. La Marmilla fu abitata fin dal Neolitico e fu intensamente popolata in età nuragica. Ancora nel periodo punico e romano la Marmilla era sfruttata in modo intensivo per la produzione del grano. Il paesaggio della Marmilla è molto dolce, caratterizzato da basse colline di marna calcarea e da altopiani dei tigiare, costituiti da un basamento di marna calcarea e da uno strato superiore di basalto. La marna calcarea e il basalto furono alla base della costruzione dei nuraghi, e tra cui vedete qui nuraghe di Barumini ed altri tanti nuraghi di altri edifici connessi con questa cultura. Il nuraghe di Barumini è uno dei 26 nuraghi presenti nel territorio appunto comunale, dunque quasi un nuraghe per chilometro quadrato. È situato al piede sud-orientale della Giara di Gesturi, una zona fittamente popolata in età nuragica, come potete vedere dall'immagine, che costituiva un distretto nuragico sicuramente di una certa rilevanza, sia per le risorse naturali che erano presenti, anche per la prossimità con quella diciamo via che portava dall'area campidanese verso l'interno dell'isola, dove erano presenti dei giacimenti minerari che erano funzionali alla metallurgia del bronzo, un'abilità nella quale i sardi protostorici erano particolarmente versati. Dunque, col passare del tempo, il nuraghe su Nuraghi fu ricoperto da una coltre di terra, di pietre e di terra, che gli diede l'aspetto di una delle tante colline della Marmilla. In realtà poi diversi studiosi dell'Ottocento e del primo Novecento ne rilevarono la presenza. Le immagini che vedete qui sono immagini del primo Novecento, quando la collinetta, diciamo, era frequentata da cacciatori, ma anche da bambini del paese di Barumini, che andavano lì a giocare, attratti da misteriosi cunicoli che si aprivano, si intravedevano nella sommità della collinetta e che alimentavano la fantasia dei loro giochi. Tra questi bambini vi era anche Giovanni Liliu, che di lì a non molto tempo avrebbe portato alla luce il nuraghe. Giovanni Liliu nacque a Barumini il 13 marzo del 1914, da una famiglia contadina benestante che avrebbe voluto per lui una carriera di medico o di notaio, ma lui preferì abbracciare quella che diventò poi la passione della sua vita, l'archeologia. Dunque, compiuti i primi studi in Sardegna, fu mandato per gli studi liceali a Frascati, vicino a Roma, dopodiché si iscrisse all'Università La Sapienza, dove si laureò e si perfezionò, orientandosi verso gli studi della preistoria e della protostoria, che erano più consoni alla natura della sua terra. Liliu ebbe degli importanti maestri come Ugo Rellini, Raffaele Petazzoni e Giglioli. Le vicissitudini della Seconda Guerra Mondiale però lo riportarono in Sardegna, dove lui poté avviare la sua lunga e felice carriera, prima nei ruoli della Soprintendenza alle Antichità della Sardegna, poi nei ruoli dell'Università di Cagliari, che dopo alcuni incarichi gli attribuì nel 1955 la cattedra di Antichità Sarde. Dunque, sostenuto da queste istituzioni e sostenuto dai finanziamenti della Regione Sardegna, Liliu poté coronare il sogno di ridare luce al nuraghe dell'infanzia. Lo scavo del suo Nuraghi iniziò nell'aprile del 1951 e si chiuse nel novembre del 1956. Furono operazioni di scavo molto complesse e molto rischiose, data la grandiosità del monumento e la grandezza e il volume dei crolli. E tra l'altro, ovviamente, dati i tempi, furono utilizzati dei sistemi abbastanza rudimentali, come potete vedere l'uso dei buoi per trascinare i grossi blocchi, e gli stessi operai non erano certamente operai specializzati, ma erano dei braccianti del luogo che, convertiti all'archeologia, ma che comunque si appassionarono molto presto all'impresa. Però sul piano scientifico Liliu fu comunque diciamo coadiuvato dai suoi studenti universitari. Dunque, nonostante però i limiti ovviamente dettati dai tempi, si può dire che gli scavi su Nuraghi furono per l'epoca degli scavi d'avanguardia, perché per la prima volta veniva utilizzato in Sardegna il metodo stratigrafico che Liliu aveva appreso alla scuola di Ugo Rellini. Per la prima volta vennero effettuate delle datazioni a radiocarbonio su un reperto ligneo proveniente dallo scavo del monumento. Alla fine degli scavi fu pubblicato un dettagliato resoconto ovviamente dei risultati. Dunque, in questo modo il nuraghe di Baruni divenne, diciamo, un caposaldo della cronologia nuragica, in parte valido ancora oggi. Per la prima volta, tra l'altro, l'archeologia sarda veniva diciamo, posta all'attenzione della comunità scientifica internazionale, e diciamo che il nuraghe anche diveniva un simbolo della stessa Sardegna. Sui contesti e sui materiali provenienti dalle scavi del suo Nuraghi si formarono molti allievi di Giovanni Liliu, divenuti poi validissimi archeologi che hanno dato e che danno ancora lustro all'archeologia sarda e in generale all'archeologia mediterranea. I molti reperti che provennero dagli scavi del suo Nuraghi sono oggi parzialmente esposti, in parte presso il Museo Archeologico Nazionale di Cagliari, in parte presso il Polo Museale Casa Zapata di Barumini. Il nuraghe di Barumini è una costruzione estremamente complessa, costruita chiaramente con i sistemi che insomma, sono stati utilizzati per tutti i nuraghi sardi, quindi piani inclinati, rampe, dispositivi per il sollevamento e il posizionamento dei blocchi. Da un punto di vista architettonico, il nuraghe utilizza il modulo della torre troncoconica, caratterizzata dalla sovrapposizione di filari di blocchi sempre più piccoli man mano che la muratura si innalza. Il su Nuragic fu costruito prevalentemente con blocchi di basalto e in misura minore con blocchi di marna calcarea, una roccia più leggera e più adatta alle parti alte del monumento. Dunque, il nuraghe si presenta costituito da una torre centrale, io uso la terminologia militare anche io, da un bastione quadrilobato costituito da 4 torri minori unite da cortine rettilinee, bastione circondato da un antimurale con piccole torri unite da cortine rettilinee e da un villaggio, del villaggio. Quindi un contesto che chiaramente ha una lunga stratificazione cronologica e architettonica, quindi a partire quantomeno dal XIV secolo, quindi quantomeno dal bronzo recente, ma forse anche da prima, e per arrivare al periodo romano, come vedete da queste due planimetrie, di cui la seconda più aggiornata, in quanto diciamo, aggiornata anche in base agli ultimi studi che sono stati fatti dall'archeologo Giacomo Paglietti. Dunque, quindi abbiamo diverse fasi costruttive del monumento. In una prima fase, quindi possiamo dire nel bronzo recente, diciamo dal XIV se non prima, al XII secolo, fu costruita la torre centrale, il bastione quadrilobato e un primitivo antemurale. La torre centrale era alta più di 20 metri, in origine aveva 3 camere sovrapposte voltate a tolos ed erano camere che erano collegate tra di loro attraverso una scala intramuraria che poteva essere, che era accessibile attraverso un'apertura che si apriva nel paramento murario della camera inferiore. Nella camera mediana era presente una finestra, chiaramente evidentemente per motivi di illuminazione degli ambienti. La camera inferiore invece era illuminata tramite un ingresso a luce trapezoidale sormontato da un architrave monolitico. Allora, la parte superiore della torre centrale e delle torri minori era caratterizzata da un terrazzo sporgente sostenuto da mensoloni di basalto posti radialmente, mensoloni che tuttora sono visibili nell'area di scavo, in parte naturalmente. E dunque le torri minori erano costituite da 2 torri sovrapposte, non collegate fra di loro internamente, mentre la camera inferiore era dotata di un doppio ordine di feritoi o prese di luce. E dunque l'ingresso al complesso avveniva attraverso la cortina di sud-est, che è appunto ingresso che portava in un cortile semilunato dotato di un pozzo che consentiva l'accesso a tutte le camere inferiori della torre e della torre centrale e delle torri minori. E qui vedete le aperture, insomma le prese di luce, e poi ne parleremo dopo poi. Dunque per arrivare però alla camera superiore delle torri minori e per arrivare agli spalti delle cortine si doveva passare attraverso uno stretto passaggio che tuttora si percorre durante la visita del monumento, che si apriva nel paramento, in posizione sopraelevata nel paramento murario del cortile. In questo periodo, in questa stessa fase, veniva costruito un primo antemurale, del quale non si sa esattamente il numero delle torri. Dunque le torri erano anch'esse cupolate in origine e avevano un doppio ordine di feritoi o prese di luce. Allora, abbiamo qui una seconda fase costruttiva, quindi riportabile al bronzo finale, quindi diciamo grosso modo dal XII all'XI secolo, insomma, nel quale per ragioni non chiare, probabilmente cedimenti strutturali, ovvero anche la possibilità che ci fossero dei fenomeni alluvionali ricorrenti, si rese necessario rifasciare il corpo quadrilobato con una poderosa muratura in blocchi di basalto. Quindi questo rifascio cosa determinò? Determinò la chiusura dell'originario ingresso del monumento e ovviamente la chiusura anche delle prese di luce delle torri minori. Dunque fu costruito un nuovo ingresso sopraelevato, l'ingresso da cui oggi si entra per visitare il monumento, collegato con una porta, con un finestrone che si apriva sul cortile alla stessa altezza del finestrone della camera mediana della torre centrale. I due finestroni erano sicuramente collegati attraverso una passerella lignea che consentiva anche, attraverso una scala che vi era appoggiata, l'ingresso diretto al piano inferiore del cortile. Contemporaneamente veniva ristrutturato l'antemurale, che in questa fase viene a presentare 7 torri con un ingresso a est e un ingresso ad ovest, e qui vedete uno degli ingressi. E in questa fase, sempre del bronzo recente, vi fu anche la costruzione del villaggio, un villaggio di capanne circolari, spesso allineate, in posizione allineata, dunque coperte con una copertura appunto che sicuramente non era molto diversa da quella delle capanne dei pastori sardi tradizionali, insomma, quindi coperte con dei travi di legno e con delle frasche, dove appunto sono attestate diverse attività. E si riferisce a questa fase anche la costruzione di un vano molto particolare, il vano 135, che qui vedete durante lo scavo, che ha restituito un'interessante stratigrafia e un altrettanto interessante rito di fondazione, rilevabile attraverso la presenza di pozzetti dove sono stati trovati dei contenitori di terracotta capovolti e dei resti di sacrifici animali, interpretati appunto come sacrifici animali. Dunque abbiamo poi una terza fase, che è una fase del primo ferro, quindi diciamo dal X secolo all'VIII secolo a.C., grosso modo, dove fu costruito un nuovo villaggio molto diverso e molto più evoluto rispetto al precedente, nel quale ormai non si parla più di capanne ma si parla di case, quindi case cosiddette a corte con un profilo planimetrico curvilineo e dei vani radiali affacciati su un cortiletto comune. Dunque queste case sono spesso dotate di piccoli ambienti rotondi, chiamati appunto rotonde con bacile, originariamente cupolati, con all'interno un sedile perimetrale, un bacile di pietra centrale ed altri bacili per la raccolta dell'acqua ed ambientini per il riscaldamento. Dunque non è chiara la funzione di questi ambienti. Recentemente è stata fatta appunto l'ipotesi che si trattasse di saune. Risale alla fase di primo ferro anche la capanna delle riunioni, dove è una capanna sicuramente particolare, diversa dalle altre, dove fu trovato per la prima volta un modellino litico di Nuraghe, che è sicuramente un elemento importante perché è un elemento rituale, tanto per cominciare, ma è molto importante perché per la prima volta questa scoperta suggerì agli archeologi come era fatta la parte superiore della struttura della torre, cioè con il terrazzo sporgente di cui abbiamo già parlato. In questa fase abbiamo anche delle capanne particolarmente eleganti, come la capanna ZZ, che è caratterizzata da un ornamento superiore a spina di pesce di tipo geometrico nella parte alta. Abbiamo poi, almeno secondo alcuni archeologi, una quarta fase che è collocabile probabilmente nel VII-VI secolo a.C., caratterizzata dalle cosiddette case a schiera, che sono queste che si addossano all'antemurale. Allora, dunque abbiamo visto con queste poche slide quanto questo monumento sia stato importante, sia importante da un punto di vista monumentale e da un punto di vista storico. Peraltro questo nuraghe ha costituito anche quindi comunque un fondamentale elemento propulsore nella storia degli studi di archeologia nuragica in generale in Mediterranea. Dunque su queste basi negli ultimi anni del Novecento la soprintendenza archeologica nella persona del soprintendente di allora Vincenzo Santoni avviò il percorso della procedura per il riconoscimento UNESCO del monumento, procedura che durò 2 anni dal 1996 e che si chiuse il 16 dicembre del 1997 con l'atto formale di iscrizione del monumento alla lista UNESCO. Con le motivazioni che vedete qui riportate. E con lo stesso provvedimento, diciamo, con lo stesso atto formale, il Comitato per il Patrimonio Mondiale inseriva nella lista UNESCO anche 4 altri straordinari contesti archeologici del territorio italiano: Pompei, Ercolano, Torre Annunziata in Campania e la Valle dei Templi di Agrigento in Sicilia. Qui vedete un'immagine dell'evento che si celebrò a Barumini nel giugno del 2000 in occasione della posizione della targa a cura della soprintendenza, targa che appunto riporta le motivazioni di questo prestigiosissimo riconoscimento. Qui vedete Giovanni Liliu, che allora aveva 86 anni, con l'allora ministro per i beni culturali italiano Giovanna Melandri. Come potete vedere, la targa ha la forma del lingotto oxide di tipo cipriotta, che è un manufatto che gli archeologi conoscono molto bene, è molto diffuso in Sardegna, che testimonia bene, insomma, le relazioni mediterranee, insomma, al tempo dei Nuraghi, e anche l'abilità metallurgica, appunto in campo metallurgico, dei sardi protostorici. Dunque, ovviamente il riconoscimento UNESCO del 1997 determinò un cambiamento a Barumini. Il comune di Barumini aveva avuto infatti dal Ministero, gli era stata attribuita dal Ministero la gestione, scusate, del monumento. Dunque, per fronteggiare così, insomma, ovviamente questo riconoscimento determinò un progressivo interesse verso il monumento e una continua crescita dei visitatori italiani, ma soprattutto stranieri. Dunque, per fronteggiare questa nuova situazione, il comune di Barumini pensò appunto di creare un nuovo organismo dotato di una certa agilità e in un certo senso anche di una certa autonomia per gestire appunto la nuova situazione. Quindi la Fondazione Barumini Sistema Cultura, che fu creata nell'anno 2006 e che tuttora gestisce il Nuraghi di Barumini, il Polo Museale Casa Zapata, il centro di promozione culturale dedicato a Giovanni Liliu, che appunto è finalizzato all'allestimento di mostre, all'organizzazione di convegni e di attività di tipo in generale didattico e culturale. Spesso il Nuraghe fa oggi da magico sfondo ad eventi di particolare importanza di tipo culturale. Grazie, io ho finito. Grazie agli organizzatori per questa bella serata.
Thank you, Caterina. So this brings us now to our final part of the session today, in which we can have a chance to have questions. And I should note, by the way, that the schedule says questions and answers. So there's a little bit of pressure on you guys today. I'll just say at the outset, sitting here as you all have, I'm really struck by just the range of papers we've seen today. So again, thank you to our organizers for bringing such an extraordinary group of people here, but also people who, scholars who then brought with them such a range of topics. So we of course, we began, thanks to Anna, we began with sort of the structural side of looking at the structures themselves. We then moved on to looking at the finds, thanks then to Giovanna, who sort of not only had the artifactual record, but then reminding us of just how far and wide that world was. We then went, of course, with Emily, who took us to, I guess, the finds that are really kind of small, micro scale. And so that, is again giving us this again, a very, very different presentation and different kind of material of looking at diet and the environment, which of course was then picked up naturally by Luca by looking at, of course, isotope analysis and DNA. And also, I think, then finally, again, thank you to Caterina for then kind of bookending it with the structures themselves on the one hand, but also I think, and again, thank you to Luca for kind of reminding us of the connectivity of these topics to the history of Sardinian archaeology as well, and how tightly entwined that development is. So there's a lot to be said here, but I also know that there are a lot of questions as well. So I want to sort of open it now to the floor. There are going to be microphones that will come around because we can probably all hear each other, but there are people, I think, tuning in on the the internet, so I think it helps them. So I'll leave it to the floor for the moment. Questions? Okay, well, I get the, okay. Well, I saw your hand first, so yes, great.
Given the marine routes from Spain along the coast, are there marine excavations and research? Because I would guess there's a lot under the water. Yeah, but expensive to do, right?
There are many excavations in Spain, but they are not really related to Nuragic materials. They are normally, Nuragic pottery has been found in emergency excavations when they were building something, public works. So there are not real excavation aimed to discovering, to studying finds related to the roots, for example. It happens. They find them in other kinds of excavation. Unfortunately, we don't have marine excavations, subaquatic excavations, so we don't know nothing. We don't know anything about boats, about other things related to the roots. The only thing we know are the materials found along the route, in the harbors, for example, in the settlement close to the coast. That's the only thing that we have. In Sardinia, the same. In Sardinia, probably worse, because in Sardinia, the materials that we have, they come from the interior part of the island.
Thank you. The blue shirt? Yep.
I have a few questions, actually. Has any money, coinage, been found? The ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, Egyptians, they all had some methodology of paying for different things. So you have this trade with the Spanish or Portuguese and the Iberian Peninsula. Was it a barter system, or was there some coinage involved? No coins.
It's a moment in which we don't have money. There were exchanges of goods, but we don't have money at that moment. So it's more difficult to find the proofs of these exchanges. We just find the vases, for example, the containers of the exchanged goods, metal, but we don't find money because in that moment just were exchanges.
And is there anything found? I read a while ago from a book from maybe the 90s that there was no known language or tablet that had any inscriptions of an alphabet or anything. And then I just read recently that there was some stone found with some inscriptions on it.
No, after, in later moments. In that moment, there was not a writing system, so we don't have inscriptions.
How did the people communicate? Is there any?
Speaking.
But we don't know the
language. Without having any writing, we don't know the language. Probably the languages in the Mediterranean Sea were more similar each one to the other than now. But they could communicate. We see that they could communicate in some way. But for what concerning Sardinia, we don't have writing. In the Iberian Peninsula, yes. In the Iron Age, they started to have some forms of writing. But in Sardinia, not.
Thank you.
If I may add, this is not. Yes. If I may add only one thing, just to add to the overall interest in Sardinian heritage. The only remnant of the language of the Bronze Age is most likely in the place names. Especially the center of the island has one of the highest frequencies of prehistoric, pre-Roman, pre-Phoenician place names that have been studied, but nobody has really gotten a lot of meanings from words. But there are reconstructions of some elements of the phonetics of the ancient language of the Nuragics, and possibly also some structures of the word formation. But unfortunately, without sentences, there is no meanings that we can attach to these place names.
One thing about coins, because they are not coins. but they haven't. But they probably use pieces of ingots as coins, because we found in the ores a lot of ingots, all in pieces of different points. So it's possible this is a form of coin.
Actually, to add to that as well, just this past excavation season, my team uncovered a couple of little token type things. One is very flat and made of well, they're both quite flat. One's very thin and made of bone, and one's a bit thicker and made of stone, and they've been rounded. So this kind of token system for it's not exactly money, but sort of a way of keeping track of exchanges or keeping track of obligation, is known in the Near East. It's possible that's what these are, but that's also a bit of an interpretive leap. There's lots of other stuff you can use a flat round thing for, but it is at least suggestive.
So I just wanted to say that I'm particularly interested in the sort of bird's eye view of these structures, because they're just incredibly beautiful. And I want to ask you more, Emily, later about the ways that you make those kinds of images as well. But it leads me to think about the degree to which they understood the structures that they were in. And if I think I understood correctly, there was a kind of model replica of one of the towers in miniature form that was found in this structure, right? Which is very, very interesting to me in the sense of it's almost a kind of self-conscious act to create an image of something that is so to scale. And I don't know, I wondered if maybe it's a question for Anna. I don't know anyone wants to answer or kind of speak to that in particular.
So the phenomenon of Nuraghi models in stone or also in bronze is very interesting, because it's very significant for the memory, for the idea of the greatness of ancestors. So they made this for this, because it's the same of icon. They reproduce in pottery, in stone, in a lot of materials. So it's an idea very, very strong to relate himself to the past, to the ancestor, to the greatness of the ancestor that built these very, very high towers. But I think there is another page, because maybe they also, we lost completely this, but the modern architects think that it's possible they made model also for constructed Nuraghi, because it's impossible construct this without project. And the project, this I relate which speak some architect now. This type of project is possible if you construct a 3D model, not to drawing a scheme of Nuraghi. No, you need to construct a model, and maybe they did this by wood and other organic materials that we don't have more.
Thank you. I want to ask about the relation of the Nuragic culture and the Talaiotic culture of Majorca and Minorca. Thank you.
We did for 40, no, I think more than 14 years, 20 years, a long project in Minorca to see if there are connections about the two islands. We don't find connection directly, But if you see the monument, the Talayot in Minorca, especially, not in Majorca, but in Minorca, you can see that there are some structure, they consider this proto-Talayot, not really the canonic model of Talayot. It's very, very, very similar to corridor Nuraghi. If you enter in one of these structures, you say, oh, good, I into a proto-Nuraghe, but really it's very, very strong. And the same is with the close island of Corse. There are they named this Torre. The Torre is very, very close to the proto-Nuraghe. So in the early Bronze Age, in the early Middle Bronze Age, maybe they connect, they have relationships in this part of West Mediterranean. And then they lost a bit this connection, because in Corse they don't know the Tholos, and also in Talayot world they don't know the Tholos, this kind of construction.
If I can add something, in the early Iron Age we have the first connections, or better, the first evidence of connection with Sardinia, but we're talking about the 8th century, when in Ibiza we found some Santimbenia amphoras. But we are talking about another period, another moment in which navigation was probably better than the period before. You have to know that navigation between Sardinia and Balearic Islands is very difficult, even now. The winds are not always good for navigation between the islands. It's good in some moments of the year to navigate from Menorca to Sardinia, but the contrary is very difficult. So probably at the beginning, probably they had relations, connections, but they were not so strong because of the difficult way of sailing to that part. While in Iron Age, probably navigation had some new possibilities, new boats, we don't know, new techniques, and probably they started to have better connection. But in the early Iron Age, the connection, the relations between the Iberian Peninsula and Sardinia went down because the changes in Sardinia, so we don't have many evidence of this.
Thank you. More questions from the room? Yeah.
Did you find some excuse me, on the amphora, did you find some paintings? Some
paintings?
Yeah.
No.
Some drawings with pigments?
No, they're not.
Questions from the room? I'm going to throw in one question, if I may, just get in one question. So, we've learned so much about so many of these contributions that you've made to, and that people are making to Nuragic culture. And then this might be an unfair question because there might be several different answers to it. But I guess my question is, where do you think it's going? Where is Nuragic? Where are Nuragic studies going in the near and or distant future? Are there trends and patterns that you're seeing that will lead towards questions that either haven't been answered yet that might be answered, or are there new questions that you see on the horizon that have not been thought of before? Where are we going? I know it's unfair, come on, but it's a good, I am genuinely curious as to where it's going.
Yeah, I don't really know where it's going, but definitely I have the feeling that a big part of where we go on the sort of methodological side has to sort of align and be a little more influenced by new studies, not only on stable isotopes, but also more DNA, which is becoming definitely prominent in many ways, and all sorts of technological applications. So that according to some archaeologists in general, we are really in the middle of a new revolution in the paradigms, because a lot of things that we could not actually detect before, now we can. We can actually tell migration directly. We can tell from isotopes, from DNA and so on. So a much more generalized use of these techniques probably will make a difference. On the theoretical side, I think a lot depends on different scholars, but this problem of understanding what is really unique, what's the legacy of the Nuragic culture, I think will need to be tackled. And so these ideas about, you know, is it a hierarchical society? Is it a society that was just of equals? Makes a difference also in what we can think of Nuragic in global terms. So I believe those are issues that we need to tackle, sort of, again, deconstructing a lot of the ideas that have been proposed and testing them and finding ways to actually get to that.
Okay.
So that's my idea, at least.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would second a lot of that. I don't claim to have any kind of global view, but from my experience, the scholars who get in touch with me, especially kind of like young scholars who are doing PhDs or doing postdocs who get in touch to do collaborations, most of it is asking for some kind of archaeological science-based collaboration. It's a DNA, it's an isotope, it's paleobotanical or faunal-based. So I do think that that is just a trend in interest, or at least that's what I'm seeing. So yeah, I think getting that revolution in what we're able to do is I'm seeing that. Yeah, and I would also second your theoretical issues when you have scholars across the board, some arguing for, you know, straight up aristocracy and hierarchy, and some arguing for total anarchy and acephalous societies. We need to come up with some good methods for testing those against each other.
Just to add to this topic, there is even someone who, against the mainstream views that identify like an increase in social complexity and more centralization in the Iron Age. For example, if I'm not mistaken, Paglietti, he actually identifies in the Iron Age a sort of a more shared power from possibly some, you know, more centralized, at least at the local level, type of system. So the reunion huts would actually represent something more shared rather than something that's only closed to aristocracy. So there is really a lot that we need to interpret and understand.
Great, thank you. If there's not any final questions, I know we have a reception coming up, and so I'm going to leave the last word to Barbara. So thank you.
So we are going to cap off this afternoon dedicated to Sardinia's cultural heritage by raising finally a glass in our gallery downstairs, while also celebrating the opening of the exhibition on Barumini and the Nuragic culture of Sardinia. We are thankful to the region of Sardinia for its generous support and to the Montepramas Foundation for its collaboration. I'm deeply grateful to my colleagues and students here at the Italian Academy for their ideas and energetic work. Finally, please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers and terrific moderator for a very stimulating afternoon. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for being with us today. So it's now time for a reception. Buona serata a tutti e grazie.